your cuppa. Sorry, that's a little brand plug for me. I hope you enjoyed your cuppa and your light little refreshments out there as well. We are now joined by Linda Ginger, Syndicate 37 Chair of the CEO Institute, who's going to lead this next panel conversation on Connect Systems, Data and AI. Over to you, Linda.
Thank you. So, it's nearly afternoon, is it? No? Good morning and welcome. So we're here today to talk about enabling AI for efficiency and security. But before we talk more about AI, I'd like to ask or start with a very important question, and that is, what if AI isn't the biggest opportunity? What if it was the mirror? Because it exposes the fragmented systems that we actually have in the workplace. And you've already heard, if your strategy isn't connected to execution, AI exposes it. If your data is fragmented across platforms and systems, AI exposes it. And if your people are spending hours in meetings, searching for information, duplicating work, and manually reporting, guess what? AI doesn't solve that problem. It just amplifies it. So the report we're drawing on today argues that productivity isn't the decline of people not working harder. In actual fact, people are working harder than ever. The real issue is that the strategy, the systems and people have been disconnected, creating this complexity that we're all feeling, the manual work, the wasted effort. And sustainable productivity is about reconnecting these foundations, just not simply adding AI to it. So today's conversation isn't really about AI, is it? It's about how leaders build organisations that are AI ready, where technology, security, governance and people work together to create real competitive advantage. So to help me unpack that, I'm delighted to introduce three fabulous experts who each bring a different perspective on that challenge. And I'd love to introduce Abe Karmas, is the AMD lead for Dell Technologies across Australia and New Zealand, working at the intersection of advanced computing, artificial intelligence, and modern data centre infrastructure. And I already know he's got a real particular passion about helping leaders move beyond the hype around AI and focusing on the foundations that require it to be adopted securely, responsibly, and at scale. Thanks, Abe.
Thank you.
We also have Alex Timms. Alex is a Business Development and Alliance Manager of Dell Technologies, focused on helping organisations modernise data, content and AI-driven workflows. Alex's work spans media and entertainment, data management and emerging AI use. And it's about turning technology innovation into practical business outcomes. And just for a little FYI, he has over 15 years of Animal Logic, now Netflix Animation, where he led technology teams around Sydney. And he also is trying to train a robot, dog that is. He isn't having too much success. So thanks, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
Sash, with over 20 years of experience spanning technical engineering, consulting and business leadership, you've built a career driving client outcomes through strategic use of technology. For the past 15 years, this focus is centred on cybersecurity, ensuring security priorities are tightly aligned to business strategy and enterprise objectives. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for the conversation today. I have a few questions for you, and I would like, if I'm going to direct one of the questions to you, but either of the other two, if you have something to add, I think it would be really valuable to do that. So the first question to Sash. The research finds that large organisations run about 305 systems, with only 15% of that software spend that is managed by IT. And similar businesses show similar pattern, and also even the smaller businesses. I mean, it's extraordinary that you count 305 different systems. So when you walk into an organisation, whether it's like 50 people or 5,000, what does the typical tech stack look like? Who is actually in charge of it, and what risk does that create?
It's a great question. It often, if you have some visibility, it looks like spaghetti. Some of that spaghetti is on the table, some of that spaghetti is underneath, some of it's hidden in a cupboard. There's a lot of unknown, and coming from my area of expertise, that's where a lot of the risk comes from. It's not what you have, it's what do you know about, what don't you know about. So through the lens of cybersecurity, through the lens of risk, step number one, know what you have. Then it's how is it involved in what you do? Where are the risks? So knowing what you have is step one, and most organisations, other than the very small, fail at step one. They don't know what they have. If we're trying to, and there's an undercurrent of how do we use AI, that's going to be challenging if you don't know the systems and tools that you have in place. It's spaghetti. How do I connect them? How do I give AI the appropriate visibility into those tools? What is the appropriate visibility? And I might drill down onto that. There was a time when information was stored in paper records in a filing cabinet. And we fast forward, and we had computers, and that information was stored on an individual computer. Then we had these wonderful things called databases, where we would store lots and lots of information, and it would be structured, and we could query that and provide lots of fantastic reports. And that source of information, the data lake, is an opportunity. It's also a risk. So if we are giving AI access to repositories of information, that's fantastic. We want to give it all of the context in the same way that when I look at various pieces of information, I can distill that and I can put that into my board pack. Maybe AI can do that for me. Maybe that can happen across the organisation. The risk, what happened in the past with a database full of lots and lots of information, very useful information, was people got access to information in that database that they shouldn't have had access to. So then we caught up, and what happens really is technology, we have functionality, and then security risk catches up. And so database security, roles, access controls, rights to certain data views caught up. And so everyone knows you've got certain data stores, maybe payroll information, super sensitive, only limited access to that data. And we've caught up, and the security controls are now mature. AI is taking that leap of functionality. That's great. We're already seeing lots of published examples and probably many, many more within organizations where the AI has been given access to information, and people querying using the AI are getting access to information that they shouldn't have access to. So the security controls, the ability to access information that you shouldn't have access to, I think that piece is catching up. And it's not a technical problem. There's how you deploy and use and think about AI in your organisations, to get to realise the opportunity, you need to give it access to lots of information. You need to do that with some bounds.
Okay.
So I think that's
a very comprehensive answer to that. But I love the spaghetti idea. Do you think that do people know how much spaghetti's on the floor and how much is on the table, guys?
Sorry.
It depends whether you have a robotic dog or not, I think. I want to just add, I think one of our members earlier, and I do want to, I did get permission, I think we have some of the solution already in the room to some of what Sash just spoke about. And I think there's one point I want to make before I get to Jackie's comments earlier. When we go into modernisation of anything, we often look at the legacy, and this touches on that multi-generational workforce. Apply that to technology. We often look at legacy technology as being something bad. More often than not, it's the legacy tech that's doing the heavy lifting. It's your legacy technology that's invoicing and collecting money and paying your employees. So I would argue that when you do look at that lens of spaghetti, don't neglect the old stuff that's maybe in the back of the cupboard or has been kicked around by the dog. And in respect to some of the, we call it identity access management, Jackie made the point in her organisation, am I allowed to mention the organisation? Pronto Software, where they actually onboard their AI agents as staff members. And by virtue of actually bringing them into the system through a HR system, I'd imagine Pronto has all the controls in place that define things like access, define things like what they can and can't do, but more importantly, define what the expectation is. And the flip side of that, when the AI agents are not performing, Jackie assures me she puts them on a performance improvement plan. So, you know, we have some of the answers already in place for a lot of these questions, and Sash hasn't even touched on the surface of that bowl of spaghetti in the context of security and governance and compliance. So,
Yeah, no, that's cool. And
and thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, I think too you were saying that the systems can be this disparate number of like databases that aren't talking to each other, but there's also people's use of different apps and things that they've brought into the workplace that make up that 305, or maybe most people don't even know, the CEOs and business leaders don't know how much is actually in the business already, besides the legacy systems that have been put in by the organisation. So just, so I failed to mention too, at the end of the session, we are live streaming with live people being on here. We have actually 10 minutes, so if you want to take some notes as to some questions you might have at the end, we do have some time available at the end, so please, by all means. Alex, nearly 2 in 5 workers lose significant time to manual work because their systems don't talk to each other. What are the root causes of that fragmentation? And does it look different in a small business than in an enterprise one?
I think every business starts clean and with good intent. And as it grows, there's organic growth, sometimes very rapid growth. And in order to meet the requirements of that growth, there are a lot of systems that are put in place by different departments, different people, with different goals, but it's all with the intent of supporting that business. But it's typically not designed from the ground up to talk to each other and to use the same data set. Giving you an example from my own career, I started at Animal Logic back in Happy Feet days when they were starting on that film. There were 80 people in that business at that time, and everything was done manually. You know, everything was stored on workstations. We had separate storage systems for editors. We had separate storage systems for VFX artists. And at the end of it all, we had 14 unique silos of storage, like big, full rack monolithic storage solutions, plus probably around 20 to 30 rooms with their own storage on it. None of that data was connected. None of those systems were connected. The only connections we had were people writing scripts to move data to different silos and try to keep together. I actually had 2 people full-time doing shift work, trying to move that data around. And so over a period of time, we realised we needed to change. That change was automation and building connections. That took the form of an asset management system where we were tracking assets, the concept of assets, dependencies, so all those things that are needed to make that asset. Assets also included people and how those people connected to each other and were tracked. It helped with billing and forecasting for resources. And over time, that took a long time to mature. And actually, that change was not the hardest thing to do within the organisation. It was actually the change management. And it took about 2 years of non-stop selling of the goal and the vision and why that's going to help those people and for them to actually start to see the benefits of adding that structure and stopping them saving everything in their home directories, for example. So I think it happens organically and it happens to solve spot problems. And it doesn't matter, to your point, what size the organisation is. A smaller organisation will probably have fewer systems. They'll probably have less governance, which in some instances can be a good thing, and I can explain that in a bit. Large organisations like our own have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications, and lots of complexity. Bigger ship to steer, so much harder problem to solve. But we are walking the talk. Dell's definitely in a massive period of transformation. We're trying to consolidate something like 350 separate applications and platforms down to 17, I think it is. Just to give you an example of the level of simplification that's required to achieve an outcome. And we're already seeing the value of that. I've got one place where I can go and get information. All of our data is joined. Prior to having, say, my email being vectorized and searchable by an AI agent, I had to go and copy emails into a prompt, for example, and bring in other context. So that's that manual work that AI can create if you're not connecting that data layer. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I don't know if that answers your question there.
Any other comments, gentlemen, with regard to that?
A simple one. Differentiate data from information.
Oh, explain more. This will be, everyone will be...
I thought that was simple. we
Well,
often have
people
lots
call
of data.
Information data.
And data is basically ones and zeros. And I think what we're seeing now and what both Sash and Alex has touched on is that there's a lot of unstructured data that has no meaning. And it's only of value to any business once you turn it into meaningful information. And it's become a bigger challenge. And I'd argue some of the smaller organisations in the room would have an easier task of just integrating and consolidating what they have and identifying what part of that is actually valuable.
Thank you. So Abe, just to follow on from your discussion there, I mean, there are teams that are using AI. You're obviously using it in the way that we're talking about here, but it says in the research that around 7 in 10 say it has meaningfully cut their manual work, yet fewer than half say the tools are available and actively used in their team. What's stopping the rest?
I think the same things that stop any tool from being adopted. Adding AI in front of it doesn't make it any different to anything that you introduce into your organisation. It doesn't make it any different to other software applications. You could argue that there is more complexity, but done well, it should be simple. And what a lot of organisations are not doing, it's a breakdown where they introduce anything new and expect their staff to either self-train, understand the tool. So training, enablement. A bigger one is alignment. What is the tool supposed to do? Why are you bringing it into your organisation? How does it align to my job? And that's assuming I know how my job aligns to what you're trying to do within the company. These are really basic sort of concepts. And where we fall short is we somewhat believe that the technology is the solution, and we ignore some of the basics of business. Enablement, training, alignment, and given the audience, having support and sponsorship from the top down.
Do you think that everything's just been bolted on. I'm listening to you, gentlemen, and thinking about, you know, how organisations have got to this point. It seems to me that, I mean, people invest hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars in legacy systems from way back, and everything hasn't actually moved as fast as what they're trying to do in business. So everything's just a band-aid to put on top of each other, and unravelling that. It's not designed or fit for purpose for the current business environment. So it's trying to catch up. Is there something in my evaluation that you see that's how?
Look, I'd say that many companies are, and I see this in the media industry as well, they're trying to bolt on AI into existing pipelines, and they're getting, if anything, they're getting marginal gains. They might get 15% improvement. It's those companies that I see are seeing AI as a new operating model, as a foundationally new way of working, a new way of interfacing with technology, which is very much how I see it. I see that this is the new operating system, the way that we interact with all technology, the way we interact with software and hardware. But it's those companies that are designing a new pipeline or a new way of working from the ground up rather than trying to bolt it on as another tool, because I think it's more than another tool, it's an operating model, that we're seeing huge success with. One example of that is a customer, Kennedy Miller Mitchell, which did the Mad Max Furiosa movie, George Miller's company. They adopted AI and got a 50x gain in the performance of their previous pipeline. Well, not 50%, 50x. And that was because they designed it from the ground up. They didn't try to make it solve all the problems, but they were very specific and intentional in where it made sense. And that accelerated their ability to ideate and iterate, which is very important in visual endeavours to try to get the best possible visual outcome. And I asked, George Miller's a really traditional director, I don't have enough time to tell you long stories, but George Miller's a really traditional director. He hates sort of technology getting in the way of actors. He wants to film people. And I asked him, I said, why have you suddenly taken this new turn? Why have you adopted AI? He's an older director, he's a really nice guy. And he said, because it allows me to make the movie before I make the movie, saving me creative time and saving me money. So it's about reducing risk if it's done right. It really, really reduces risk in business if you apply it at the right places.
I think coming off that risk reduction, one of my case studies, I'm reluctant to share the customer name because they are Brisbane based. We never set out to do AI. We set out to respond to a change in legislation. And this organisation had 50 plus years of legacy in data, including the filing cabinets and pieces of paper that Sash referred to. So the first thing we had to convince them of absorbing the upfront capital to digitise data, consolidate that data, and every time we came up with a possible use case of value back to the business, it prompted them to realise other value out of that. It is now an AI project, but it wasn't an AI project looking for value in the business. It was a business that was looking to address I won't say problem, a goal, and that goal was to be compliant and address changes in legislation. And the consequence is an AI use case, but it's improved efficiencies within their business. It's enabled their interns to be more productive. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I walked out of a meeting room looking at the young interns with hope on their face, thinking, look, I'd be polishing my resume, but the reverse happened. They became more efficient, they became more successful in bringing in new clients, and those interns became busier. And it goes back to, you know, where you've got the business clearly aligned to the technology, whether it's AI or any other technology, you will realise value out of it.
But it's about the design in the beginning, isn't it? And
Yes.
knowing what you've already got.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So, and it harks back to Jackie's point before, like tools get added very easily, don't they? But they rarely ever get retired unless you've got a process such as Jackie's working on. The report says that, you know, that one core system for each need would be the ideal situation. Now, it's easy to write, but I'm not sure it's exactly that, hard to implement, whether you're a 30-person business with a dozen apps or an enterprise with hundreds. So, Alex, where would you start, and what would you be willing to switch off?
I'd be looking for anything that's parallel or duplicate, in its goal. Trying to have a single source of truth or data layer, so it doesn't have to be on the same storage system, but it needs to be connected and have relationships between each other. And start switching off things that are duplications. There's a lot of, for use of a better term, shadow IT that exists, but there's also a lot of, spreadsheet, duplications, reporting duplications. So look for a lot of that repetition, repeating the same kind of work. Look for opportunities to reduce that manual work where teams are exchanging information. I mean, fundamentally, this is about exchanging information. It's about the human connections. We've got to remember that. It's not about just the technology. It's about the way we exchange information between each other. And so in order to be effective in that, you have to understand those connections first and foremost and how we work, and look for inefficiencies within that. I also think that it's important to sell this not as a staffing issue, and I think this has been said a number of times already, but to really sell it as allowing humans to do higher levels of work. And one thing I will add that AI is completely incapable of doing is it's not capable of being curious. Humans are capable of being curious, and the innovation comes from that curiosity. So AI can give you probabilistic answers, or you can have lots of deterministic, agents working together, but it will never have that curiosity. So if you can free those staff up to be curious, that's where some amazing stuff starts to happen. Yeah.
How do you even find out what systems, softwares, and whatever else are in a business? Like, if only 15% of the spend of those 305 are all centrally managed or paid for by the company, there has to be workplace involvement just to find out what everyone's using to even identify the duplications.
I think you need to assign a resource that's responsible for auditing that within the organisation with, the ability, authority to do so. Involve teams, actively in trying to define what it is they're doing and what they're using and why. Quite often, people that see AI as a threat to their job will perpetuate inefficiencies to try to maintain the status quo. So it's very important to, I think, up front, explain why you're doing that and what the goal is, and it's really about making them able to do high-level things and to free them up of that mundane, repetitive work and those difficulties in exchanging information across the business and with customers. And if you can get that buy-in, and it really is top-down. I've seen all the failures are bottom-up. Yep. They just hit a roof and it all falls apart. Yeah. So it has to be a top-down cultural initiative, just the same as cybersecurity is. It has to start at the very top, and it has to be made clear to the organisation why we're doing it, including just starting an audit.
Yeah, it could be that someone's discovered some amazing piece of software that actually could be applied across the whole organisation. So being able to encourage getting out of what they're actually using, I think, is important. So now, Sash, we couldn't talk about AI without addressing governance and security about it and around it. As a CEO and cyber advisor, you see the risks clearly. When companies rush to adopt AI because they feel the productivity pressure, what kinds of security vulnerabilities are they accidentally opening up?
It's very, very easy to say, no, you can't do that. There are plenty of rules in the workplace, policies, acceptable use policies. You can't do this, you can't do that. My day job is yes, if. And that's the view that the business should take, which is we need to run fast. If you don't run, you fall behind. But if you run too fast, you also fall over. So what I do is support organisations to run fast, to adopt the new technology as fast as possible, to, for M&A heavy organisations, to acquire and integrate and realise synergies as fast as possible without tripping over. And so I really like the Pronto I'll piggyback your permission, if I may. The Pronto example, it's having a intentional approach. It's not just let's turn on some technology, let's put a forklift in the warehouse and see what happens. You probably squash a foot and go through a wall. Be intentional. What are we trying to do with this piece of technology, whether it's a forklift, whether it's AI? And so I think that if you're intentional, the rest is just, it's 101. It's not anything you haven't already done in the past in terms of a new way of working, a new system, a new thing, a new product line. There's some risk management, there's a bit of analysis, but otherwise it's just being intentional with, we're going to use this AI agent, we're going to be intentional by following HR processes, by hiring, onboarding, training, performance managing, and potentially exiting this agent. Just be intentional, I think is the takeaway. Everything else is the same as what you do in business.
Yeah, thanks, Sash. I think that's an important comment, is that it's not any different to what you've done in managing risk before. It's just, don't get too scared.
I think that just like HR with onboarding AI agents, a lot of you already have the frameworks in place for security and governance and those controls. You just need to apply them to new AI projects and technology. It really is as simple and as complicated as that.
Excellent.
Would you agree? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
So I think we're going to transition to the audience with some questions. So please, there's some roving mics. So if you do have a question, if you could direct that question to one of the panellists, or all three if you want.
Thank you very much for that insightful discussion. Alex, I have a question for you. What do you think that leaders must do to turn those AI trials into sustained team efforts whilst maintaining the human accountability into the process?
Good question. I think that a lot of the failures with IT projects have been just that. They've been just little projects to have a look at it. Some of them have been really big investments in AI, and we've got some AI, which is a whole lot of servers and a whole stack. What do we do with it? And so there hasn't been a goal, and I think it's important to set a really clear, high-value business goal, objective, with regard to AI, and try to get some strong value from that. Appoint an executive owner of that particular project, and what you want to do is then try to create repeat value from that to start showing the business, including teams and groups, etc., what that is. Within our own organisation, when in the early days of adoption of AI, there was a lot of, not negativity, but it was a lot of, well, this is not really a high productivity tool that's been sold. And it wasn't until, it was starting to be more connected, the data layer was connected, that we could use customer information, presentations, emails, etc., and be able to pull all that together, that we started across teams, the penny kind of dropped and everyone went, okay, now I get it. But when it was, a frontier model that was on the web that we weren't allowed to put any kind of, confidential data on because of, privacy, it was great. It's a chat engine and a frontier model and it's fun, but there's very limited value. The value comes from your data, your workflows. And so I would say that trying not to bite off too much and being very, very specific in your goal and making sure that it has high business value and isn't just AI for AI's sake, will start to show teams that value, particularly when it's repeatable.
I've probably got two questions. I listened to the Moonshots podcast. I don't know if that's something you guys listen to a lot, but I dip in and out, and they talk about, a wide AI adoption organisations will get to a point when AI is powerful enough so you can ask it to do all the things that it needs to do to reframe how we do work. With the rise of these open source models, KikiK I'm thinking of, that's just been released, how far are we away from that, do you think, where we can actually just ask AI to redesign our workplaces so we don't have all these legacy systems and we can get it to do the heavy lifting for us?
I think we're getting very, very close to that. There is a huge problem in businesses actually understanding how they function. They don't understand their connections. They don't understand their workflows. Like, it's very difficult to go to one person and say, can you describe your whole business and how it all works, how decisions are made, where data flows. So there's an emerging kind of technological use of AI to actually monitor an organisation. So all data goes through it every time you save a file, every email, and it will start to create a map of how your business works, who talks to who, how decisions are made, etc. That's starting to emerge. I've spoken to some big AI consulting firms, and that's starting to be a thing because companies are really, regardless of the size, often struggle to describe how they work and their connections. So I think we're getting very close to that automated, workflow builder. I mean, I play with the agents. I'm sure everyone has played with, OpenClaw and Hermes, but I play with them locally at, Ultra Edge AI on a powerful machine at home. And I'm trying to chain together stuff, and I don't code. I'm useless at coding. But because of this new way of interfacing with technology, I'm able to do incredible things that I otherwise couldn't. So I'm trying to express myself and find new ways of working using an agent that has access to a range of models, including OpenAI. And then I need to do least cost routing to choose the model that's most capable of doing that for the cheapest price. That includes models I run locally. And in doing that, I'm starting to build intelligence through perpetual memory. So I'm trying a whole lot of different memory architectures, and obviously trying to maintain enough context with the agent for it to actually grow and learn. So it's actually learning my environment and what I'm trying to build and why I'm trying to build it, including trying to drive a robotic dog around my house without crashing into a wall. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, we're close.
This one's probably primarily for Sash. You're at the forefront, so you're working with a lot of different businesses, and everyone's learning as we go, right? But what are you seeing as some of the common repeated errors that are leaving a lot of businesses open to security breaches, brand reputation muck-ups, specifically around AI, or indeed any other security beyond just AI, that the people in the room here, we can go back to our businesses and grill our IT people, or in some cases ourselves, and just go, do we have some of these things in place? So some of the ones that you've seen on repeat that have caused the biggest headaches for the CEOs and the founders.
I'll pick up on the term you used, grilling IT. We need to, as leaders, create a safe space because you want to have conversations, you want to be able to walk around and people not switch windows and get the information, which is, what are you doing? And that's not the way we do it. Why? And there's a reason. It's not because people are trying to be malicious. It's because there's hoops I need to jump through, and it's difficult to do my job using the sanctioned methods. So I'm going to do it this way. And there's one person who will use a free tool, $30 a month tool. They'll pay for themselves because it makes them more efficient. There's risks that come from that because it's not at an organisation-wide level in terms of intentional and the fundamental risk assessment that you would perform, the analysis. And so by creating that safe space, you get to identify where are the opportunities. Like you mentioned, here's one person that's found a better way of doing something. Maybe we can bring that to the rest of the organisation. But they found a better way, but a lot of the time, that one person approach introduces risks. But if you allowed them to do that across the organisation intentionally, then you cover off a lot of those risks. And it comes from, there's lots of tools and technology, and we come in there and try and find out where's the shadow IT, where are all these applications that people are using, what's in the in the broom closet underneath the table that we don't know about. But the best way to do that long term is to try to establish that safe culture of, I'm doing it this way. How can I share that information? How can I get that approved indoors? because it's those little 1, 2, 3 people use of tools that introduces risks. I think there's plenty of, other than what I mentioned earlier around know what you have, the next one would be that safe culture. Use the people that you have to inform, and then you can adopt some of these systems, some of these improvements, whether it's AI or otherwise. You can adopt them safely. Grammarly was a good one. People were connecting Grammarly into all sorts of different systems. You're giving all of this information. What do they do with that? There's plenty of examples of the early days of ChatGPT, legal firms, big M&A, sensitive M&A documents going into ChatGPT, ending up in the public domain, and all sorts. If people know that it's a safe space, I could say, this is a better way of doing things. How do I do this properly?
I think what we're seeing, early adoption is a double-edged sword, and you've got to be allowed to fail. And the comment about accountability, and one of my favourite customers is, Alex comes from Animal Logic, but Weta Effects over in New Zealand, and they bleed. Every time we send something to them, they bleed. But they also innovate, and sometimes I get stressed when they're adopting technology for the first time globally, and they recently implemented something to deliver Avatar 3, the movie. There was a lot of bleeding with that deployment, but they won a design award globally for that data center deployment. So we spoke about accountability. You need to be okay with making a mistake and learning from it, because the technology moves so quickly that if you don't acknowledge that mistake, what AI does really, really well, and particularly where the spaghetti's on the ground and you're starting with chaos, it amplifies that chaos with incredible efficiency. So you need to create that, this is a HR discussion, and a cultural one from leadership that allows your staff to make a mistake and be okay with it.
Network segmentation and web isolation can also help as a strategy for testing these tools when you're sharing critical business data with them, and you're able to run it in a secure manner. Have an air gap with web access, and segment your network.
Thank you. Yeah. Is there any more questions? One final question.
Gentleman down here.
I just had a question around, I guess we talk a lot about AI, and I listen to more webinars that I care to mention, and it's obviously the constant topic. I guess I'd like to hear from you guys, just in terms of your knowledge, where you go to for your source of truth of what's possible, and actual examples. Like, I hear a lot of talking from people, not here, I just mean in general. I want to see more examples of what's possible. I've read something at the beginning of the year that in 2026, the biggest risk to business wasn't AI, it was the people selling AI solutions.
Like it.
And I just, I think a lot of people in the room probably want to know, where do you start? Where do you actually look for a source of truth?
Could I ask you a question, just for context? What is your line of business? Not a trick question. What is your line of business?
Education, training.
That's a good one. That's a real good one, because it is an area that has had a lot of investment and technology thrown at it. And am I allowed to speak out of school here, or just?
Depends how out of school you are.
Wow. Okay. I know from the AI training that gets dumped on me, it's not effective. So you've got a very valid question, and depending on the industry, depending on the workloads, there are some industries that are doing AI far better than others. As an example, legal firms, because what's law? Precedents. AI reads stuff really, really well, you know, and the law firms that are getting value out of that are still charging you as a client 40 hours time and materials, as they did before, but AI is doing that in a few minutes. So that's a good example of how they've become more profitable, more efficient. They could also charge less if they choose to, and the market will eventually regulate that. Sorry?
Didn't Deloitte do that?
Deloitte?
Large firms caught out doing that.
Well, eventually human IP, context, logic, creativity, curiosity, the ability to actually think, and I think that's where, when we look at where AI is actually being successful, there are many examples where the starting position was clear, the outcome was intentional, and the outcome was clearly aligned to four very specific drivers. Is it helping us make more revenue, or are we getting more money in the door? Is it helping our business be more efficient? Am I better utilising some form of capital, of which human IP is capital, or meeting some sort of expectation? And the example I gave earlier, which was a response to legislation, that was meeting expectation. What we delivered reduced costs and also made more money. So if you could connect those dots, you will get value out of AI. And in your specific example, there are many opportunities to do that. I'd argue whether or not some organisations are doing it better than others.
Can I add, I'm not going to point you to a good source, but I'll tell you how I developed mine. I'm in a luxurious position where I have a team of domain experts who feed me information and tell me things that are relevant. That's fantastic. But the other part is peers. Hanging out with people in your industry. They may be competitors. I remember having lunch with a competitor of ours, and we were talking about how our organisation does well in terms of trust and relationship and network, and they did really well from tenders. I was like, oh, we suck at tenders. And it was like, whoa, we use this platform, it's AI, it uses all our past responses. Having that conversation, he's using AI in this scenario successfully to solve a problem, and we weren't. That's how you're going to get the real nuggets, and it's whether it's AI or broader than that. I think it's talking to people in your industry or in your role. There's a million and one industry groups and meetups and whatnot, and I think somebody somewhere has gone through the pain, has gone through option A and B and C and said D works well for these reasons. You've shortcutted all of that pain, and now you can evaluate D or whatever that might be. So I think it's talking to people, podcasts and webinars and all that. There's a billion out there. Lead generation, hopefully with a little bit of information baked in. I think speaking to people who've done it before.
With AI, our peers are more open to talk about their successes. And I spent the first part of this week up at with Cordit, which is University Association, bunch of IT, all the IT firms across Australia. 5 years ago, you would not have had them in the room sharing what they're doing that's successful in IT or security. Because 5 years ago, they regarded that as their own IP and their competitive advantage. The theme of the event was stronger together. And what I found with AI projects, when someone does it well, they're a lot more open to talk about it and share what has worked.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to close. We're going to close right now, I'm being told. I love your point, by the way. I just want to make this comment because I am a syndicate chair. See my SMEs in my syndicate meetings, and I think they can vouch to this, is that I think if we could inspire how other organisations, to your point, from the very basis of, yes, they got an outcome, but how did they go about doing it? How did they get their employees involved to unlock some of the things that would actually help them decide on what the design looks like? So I'm with you. I think we need a lot more of those inspirational stories about how it actually happened, and sometimes they're not in your industry. Sometimes the best inspiration can come from other industries that you can apply to your own organisation. So as we wrap up, I think today's discussion has reinforced one important message, and that is AI isn't coming to replace leadership, it's actually demanding better leadership. The organisations that will create the greatest advantage won't necessarily be those with the most AI. They'll be the ones with the clearest strategy, the strongest foundations, the most connected data, and the courage, mostly, to rethink how work actually gets done in the future. And I hope today's conversation has given you not only some practical ideas, but also a few questions to take back to your organisation. And I'd sincerely like to thank our outstanding panellists for generously sharing their expertise and real-world experience with us today. I know there's never enough time to be able to share everything that you are expert in, so please join me in thanking them. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our event partners, Dell Technologies and AMD, for bringing us together and for their commitment to helping Australian organisations navigate this new era of productivity, security and innovation. And for everyone here today, we'll be sending you a follow-up email with the presentation resources, key insights from today's discussion and a selection of highlight clips that you can share with your teams and revisit later on as well. So all, thank you for your engagement, thank you for all your questions and being part of the conversation. I just want to leave one thought with you as we close, and that is AI won't define the winners. Leadership will. And AI will simply accelerate the decisions that you make today. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we're going to be on to our next